Many contend that, just because you've been a star and had a great career in sports entertainment elsewhere, it really doesn't matter to Vince McMahon. WWE's head honcho will usually only begin to take notice once you've done it for his promotion, something that has led to legendary wrestlers stumbling right out of the gate. Whether it's bad luck, worse timing, injuries, creative apathy, or Vince not wanting to push something that wasn't his own creation, these notable industry names really missed the mark when working for World Wrestling Entertainment. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 legendary wrestlers who had hugely disappointing WWE runs. Join us. Number 10. Ultimo Dragon. The revolutionary masked cruiserweight was one of the most innovative wrestlers of the 90s. He found success in Mexico, Japan, and then later in WCW. I mean, just look at how many bloody belts the bloke had. Unfortunately, it looked as though a botched elbow surgery had ended his career for good late in the decade. Luckily, Dragon recovered a few years later and was signed by WWE. His impending debut received a fair bit of hype on TV, and WWE rolled out the red carpet when it came to the presentation of his bow, which happened inside Madison Square Garden. That was bucket list stuff for the former cruiserweight champion, but that was about as good as it would get, as he very quickly got shunted down the card and became a Velocity regular. He managed to get a WrestleMania appearance out of his run, which was another bucket list item, though he fell over twice making his entrance. Shortly afterwards, he had gone back to his homeland, and a planned return a few months later without the mask was nixed. Number 9. Sabu. Another innovative performer who made their name everywhere but WWE during the 90s, the suicidal, homicidal, death-defying Sabu finally made his way there to be part of the relaunched ECW brand, having previously wrestled on both one-night stand pay-per-views. WWE had offered him a contract in the mid-90s, but he had turned it down in order to keep working on the indies and in Japan, which had proven rather lucrative for him. His WWE ECW run got off to a promising start when he had some great matches against Kurt Angle, Big Show, and Rob Van Dam, but things soon went south. Notoriously hard-headed, Sabu didn't fancy conforming to the WWE way, his reluctance to do what was asked of him, and other disciplinary problems resulting in him being taken out of the Extreme Elimination Chamber match at the disastrous December to Dismember pay-per-view. He never managed to regain his early momentum and acted out by showing up late and on one occasion without his gear. Incidents like that contributed to his release after less than a year. Number 8. Diamond Dallas Page. Diamond Dallas Page was one of the few WWE stars who accepted a buyout of their WCW Time Warner contracts in order to join WWE for the invasion. Getting into the game late and succeeding against the odds, Page was one of WCW's big homegrown success stories, becoming a huge star in the late 90s. His first assignment in WWE was being revealed as the mystery stalker of The Undertaker's then wife Sarah. It was a great reveal, and it looked like Dallas was going to be positioned at the top of the card, but he was quickly and decisively and repeatedly beaten by the American Badass and his missus, and he was basically done as a credible attraction within a matter of weeks. He adopted a cheesy motivational speaker gimmick and won the European title, culminating in a match with Christian at WrestleMania 18. That was basically as good as it got for DDP, who was soon forced to temporarily retire due to neck and back injuries. Given how his WWE career was going, perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. Number 7. Scott Steiner. One of WCW's biggest stars during their dying days, Scott Steiner was another who decided to sit out while making bank thanks to those ironclad Time Warner deals. But Big Papa Pump, who had successfully transitioned from tag team specialist to genuine main event player and world champion, had another reason to take some time off because he was physically falling apart. Years of injuries were beginning to add up, and Steiner was hurting, unsure if he would ever be able to wrestle again due to his various ailments, the most serious of which was a case of drop foot syndrome, which resulted in one of his feet being paralyzed. Surgery didn't totally fix the issue, but he was deemed fit enough to finally join WWE in late 2002. The early signs were good, and the genetic freak got a hell of a pop from the MSG crowd when he emerged at that year's Survivor Series. He immediately targeted World Heavyweight Champion Triple H, the two having a wildly entertaining feud in the lead up to their showdown at the Royal Rumble. And then the bell rang. Number 6. Goldberg. Perhaps the biggest homegrown success story in WCW history, Goldberg took the wrestling world by storm in the late 90s as fans organically took to the muscle-bound former NFL player who smashed through the competition in convincing fashion. His winning streak led to the WCW heavyweight title, and from then until the company went out of business in March 2001, the man was the man in World Championship Wrestling. He smartly collected on his Time Warner deal while doing select matches in Japan before finally joining WWE. The company proceeded to book him in the most un-Goldberg-like way possible, having him appear in a backstage comedy segment where he donned a wig and then asking him to work long matches where he had to sell for extended periods. It wasn't a great start, and when Goldberg finally started to look like himself at SummerSlam 2003, WWE had him easily fall to injured World Heavyweight Champion Triple H. He eventually beat the Cerebral Assassin for the belt, but a month too late, his subsequent run hardly setting the world on fire. His WrestleMania 20 Dream match with Brock Lesnar was a catastrophe that in many ways summed up Big Bill's dissatisfying first WWE run. Number 5, Dusty Rhodes. Many would point to the treatment of the likes of DDP, Scott Steiner and Goldberg as examples of WWE sabotaging performers who made their names in WCW, but the precedent was actually set many years prior. The American Dream was one of the biggest stars for the NWA/Jim Crockett Promotions, a former NWA heavyweight champion and someone who was always positioned at the top of the card in serious money-drawing feuds. WWE had different ideas for Dusty, however, introducing him as the cartoonish common man via a series of vignettes that saw him doing working-class things like plumbing, working in a butcher's, collecting trash, pumping gas, and so on. And then there were the polka dots. Many have contended that this was Vince McMahon's way of getting back at not only Dusty, but the entire NWA. To be fair to Rhodes, he did get over based on his undeniable charisma and promo ability, but there was always a ceiling on how far he could go in that role. Number 4, Ricky Steamboat. No complaints with Ricky Steamboat's stellar run with WWE in the 80s, but his 1991 return stint was massively underwhelming. He showed up not as the man who would put on classic bouts with the likes of Randy Savage and Ric Flair, but as the Dragon. Clearly, this was a new era, and Steamboat's New Guys was designed specifically to sell as many toys as possible. The gear and the fire-breathing entrance were actually pretty good, but he had no direction and spent his 8 or so months there mired in the mid-card. His lone pay-per-view appearance from that era was part of the 6-man opener at SummerSlam. Most of the rest of his stay featured him listlessly working with people far beneath a man of his considerable talents. Ricky, who had a request to work heel denied, eventually quit after being asked to do 2 stretcher jobs at a single television taping. He left WWE under a cloud and would end up suing the promotion a few years later over what he felt were royalties owed from the sales of VHS tapes. Number 3, Dr. Death Steve Williams. An amateur wrestling standout and star in Japan, Steve Williams was relatively unknown to the US audience when he signed a WWE contract in 1998. His hire was overseen by fan and friend and executive president of talent relations Jim Ross. Good old JR believed that Dr. Death could be a credible opponent for then WWE champion Steve Austin. It was deemed that the perfect way to build him up for Stone Cold in a relatively short space of time was to have him enter and win the Brawl for All tournament. Williams had a reputation as a hard nut, and it was believed by those in senior management that he would walk the legitimate tough man competition. Nobody counted on Bart Gunn and his formidable left hand though, and Williams was decisively knocked out in the second round of the tournament. Adding injury to insult, Doc tore his hamstring in the fight and would be on the shelf for several months after. When he came back, it was to act as backup for JR, who had momentarily turned heel and scrapped with the Bob Hollys of the world over the Hardcore title. Not long after, he was released. Number 2, Scott Hall. Scott Hall left WWE, where he'd carved out a great spot as a popular upper mid-carder for WCW in the spring of 1996. Upset with his creative and financial ceiling with Vince, he accepted Eric Bischoff's guaranteed contract, and he, along with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, set about changing the business when they formed the New World Order. The NWO made all involved a pretty penny, but Hall's personal life and substance abuse issues began to spiral out of control by the end of the decade. When he re-signed with WWE in 2002, he was still far from in the place he needed to be, and his run was a disaster because of it. He managed to bag a WrestleMania 18 match with Steve Austin, but outside of that beautiful Stone Cold Stunner Cell job, it was a dud, and his outside inside the ring antics irked his co-workers as well as management. Things came to a head on that fateful European tour, which ended with the infamous plane ride from hell. Hall was fired not long after WWE touched down on US soil, bringing his sorry 3-month stay to a pitiful end. Number 1. Vader. An irresistible force for WCW and overseas in Japan, Big Van Vader quickly established himself as one of the best big men ever by having great matches with everyone from Inoki and Hansen to Cactus Jack and Sting. He signed with WWE in the mid-90s and immediately set about showing the audience that he was going to be a dominant force going forward. He looked great during his 1996 Royal Rumble debut and was presented as a killer in the angle where he beat down beloved commissioner Gorilla Monsoon. Everything was going according to plan until he met Shawn Michaels in the WWE title main event of SummerSlam. After losing a match he really should have won, the Mastodon never really quite recovered his momentum and cooled off considerably. He had some intermittent highlights in the year that followed, but then began to drop depressingly down the pecking order, mainly putting over his opponents. The lowest point was probably his promo following his Mask vs. Mask match loss to Kane over the Edge '98, where Vader proclaimed himself to be a big fat piece of sugar.